probably close to 30 years. They've been out there and known as the biggest set. So to find out that they were shaved, it's somewhat surprising.
It's been reported a set of shed antlers sold for $1 million.
This is the General from Nebraska. He is the biggest whitetail ever known to walk the planet. And with side-to-side differences and the abnormal brow tine, the deer will net in the mid-220s.
They sell for allegedly over $1 million. 40 days later, these pictures resurfaced.
And now it has come to light that they have been altered. I brought in an antler expert, Jamie Martin, and we dive all into it right now.
If you would have said, hey, yeah, the General, that's actually had X amount of inches shaved off, I'd be like, no way. Like, that seems crazy. All right, we have breaking news in the world of deer nuts, deer fanatics, whitetail history, and I have to bring in Jamie, who is my whitetail historian that I talk to somewhat regularly about, just deer stuff. And recently, this weekend, there was a post that went up that the General, biggest set of sheds ever found, and I'll let you, give some of the attributes of it, but I'll read the post here that I think a lot of people may have seen with Cody Idol, who his dad is Dick Idol, who was one of the founding fathers of North American whitetail, which is the modern history of whitetail hunting. I feel like it's pre-North American whitetail, post-North American whitetail. So this is from Cody. And the post is breaking whitetail news on the General. As the majority of the whitetail world knows, the General has been known as the largest typical to ever walk that we know of. He has been the favorite of many whitetail enthusiasts since his sheds were found in Nebraska in 1959. Decades after decade, the General continued to be featured in magazine covers, articles, forums, big buck shows, and TV programs. Basically, best known buck ever. And very recently, yet another amazing piece of the buck story added to its intrigue as he was purchased by a private collector from West Virginia for a 7-figure price. This was the largest transaction for a pair of whitetail sheds in history. Here's where the plot thickens. A mere 40 days after this purchase, old pictures of the General surfaced online showing him with 2 sticker points. And after undertaking extensive due diligence to verify the validity of these photos, they have been confirmed to be authentic. I'm going to share these pictures with you now. So anyone listening, you have to go to our YouTube channel and watch the video version of this. What do you make of all that, Jamie?
Well, it's if you're involved in the antler world, it's earth news. The General sheds were the big set of typical antlers known for sheds and racks for a really long time. I think they were discovered in 94. So you're looking at probably close to 30 years. They've been out there and known as the biggest set. So to find out that they were shaved, it's somewhat surprising. Probably to some people, to most people, it probably is surprising. And to some people, it's actually not that surprising because the word on the street among collectors for a while now is there's a chance that they were shaved. I think some people felt that was a rumor. I think some people felt like it was more than a rumor, and unfortunately turned out to be true based on the pictures that have popped up on social media. There's actually other antlers off, really cool in a way. So this deer has changed hands recently. Earlier this year, it actually went from one collector to another, and shortly after, the new collector has owned these sheds, other antlers have come out of the woodwork, which is really amazing. In a way, it's almost like an act of God. The antlers were found in 59, and this rancher supposedly had them hanging up in his house until the early 90s. And at that point in time, Tim Condit came along, who was an outfitter in the area, and discovered those antlers. So they've been known about probably since 90, 94, 95, but they've been out there since 59. So that's an older set of antlers from Nebraska. They haven't been in many people's collections. They went from the gentleman that found them in Nebraska, and then Tim Condit was the outfitter that found them, and then he sold them not too long after that to Brad Zell, who's a collector in Pennsylvania. And then from there, they went to Cabela's, and they stayed in Cabela's for a really long time. Probably most of their tenure, if you will, ever since they left the rancher's hands, they've been at Cabela's. Somewhat felt they were untouchable in Cabela's, and then they were they were extracted from Cabela's from another collector, who then sold them to the most recent collector. So they haven't really been in that many hands. They were always looked at like the holy grail of antlers, especially typical antlers, because they are so large. They look large, and the score is also very large as well.
Yeah. And so, how did the picture? Do you have any idea how the pictures resurfaced? Because I'm just, reading that post. It's like, man, okay, these pictures have been around for a long time. They sell for allegedly over $1 million, and then 40 days later, these pictures resurface. And if I was the guy that bought them, I'd be like, man, that really kind of sucks. I spent $1 million and I bought, something that was altered that now has come to surface. Like, that's very interesting timing, I guess, is the easiest way to say it.
Timing actually of all the good and bad is very uncanny. Um, the antlers sold, I believe, in the last 90 days, but also in the last 90 days, several pieces, I should say several pieces, a few pieces from this deer have surfaced, including another set of sheds, which are supposedly from the deer, which that's really cool. That kind of validates the deer, validates that it's 100% wild and it wasn't some conjuring of farm antler, which is, anything's possible in the antler world, so you never know. Which that's great news, but then also, I guess, the ugly truth of them being shaved also surfaced as well. And from memory, the antler collector, who is Mike Shruis from Kansas, I think the story goes, made a post about another set of sheds off the general. It looks like the deer actually down the road when it was older, found in the same area, right time frame, with very similar characteristics to the big set of sheds that everyone knows. And I believe on that post, gentleman contacted him from Nebraska with the pictures. And then basically from there, Cody Idol obviously told the world that, the general had shaved points. But in a way, too, that's kind of like, it's indicative of the antler world. The antler world, interesting place sometimes. And unfortunately, guys in the past have done, probably to you and I, unthinkable things to antler. Like, we probably sit here and think, why would you do that? They were awesome the way they were. And I think people do a lot of things for notoriety, make things bigger than they really are. I think to some people, the bigger the better.
So obviously, we don't know who may have shaved. I mean, when do you think they got shaved? Like, if you had to guess, like, what? Obviously, it wasn't when they. I'm not a photography expert to be like, oh, that camera, that style of pictures from the 70s or 80s or 90s. I don't. I mean, I'm not gonna guess because I don't know. But I don't know.
So it's a great question. Um, it's pretty easy, I think, to nail it down in the rough time period. You'd have to go back to, you would assume, usually when you buy a set of sheds from the finder or a rack from the hunter, it's almost always going to be authentic. I think it's mainly authentic because they don't really understand how the antler collecting world works. They understand that sometimes every inch or every eighth matters, and if I shave this point off, it's going to increase the next score. It's usually going to be, unfortunately, it's probably going to be a collector that's going to do something. So when the rancher sold them to Tim Condit, I would imagine that there were non-typical points on them. There actually is a non-typical point on the general, still on the general now, so a little over 4 inches. But there was two other points coming off of the G2 or G3 tines on either side. And it looks like when those antlers were scored by John Cooner for Tim Condit, the non-typical points weren't there at the time. So I think it's safe to deduct at that point it was very early on in the whole process when they were discovered. I think that's where it happened. I don't think it happened at Brad Zell's possession. Definitely didn't happen in Cabela's collection. And then later on, obviously, a couple other collectors had them, and they were known for what they are or what they were before the Shaped Point story came out, which is big typical.
They were purchased from the rancher, you said, like around 94. Is that right? Okay. And so, like the mid 90s was obviously, I feel just objectively looking backwards, was probably the very beginning of like the rocket ship of whitetail media. And I feel that there was a lot of giant deer that resurfaced around that period. And it's just interesting to objectively look at that of, why is that?
I feel like in the 80s, a lot of these deer magazines were getting started. You had North American Whitetail, even Deer and Deer Hunting, 80s, and I think in the 90s, to your point, that's when it was booming. I think there's a huge demand for guys like you and me then when we were hunting, a lot younger than I was. We just couldn't get enough. Hunting, not a hobby, it's a passion. Guys are uber passionate about hunting. You can't get enough of it. I think the TV shows, the videos, the magazines, that's when it all erupted, was your point. That was the beginning of it, really, was I think the 80s were the primer, but the 90s is when it was like probably peak.
Yeah. It feels like that's the critical mass point where it had, not to bore people with like escape velocity of like, okay, this is not just it's still a subculture, but not a very, very minor subculture culture, previously.
No, it was, and that's guys that really were really pushing it. They were really good at it. They really made something out of nothing. You go back and you look at North American Whitetail specifically, look at Dick Idol and Gordon Whittington, and what they really made that magazine what it was, which is probably the biggest, most popular whitetail magazine out there.
Yeah.
Deer and Deer Hunting, Buckmaster's probably not far behind. Both great magazines. Point. Absolutely. It was booming in the 90s.
So how does and this is a loaded question, but something's only worth what someone's willing to pay. I mean, that's just the reality of things, but 7 figures, $1 million, 7 million plus was what was described. How that's $1 million plus. That is just a ton of money. How who does that? Like like for the common guy that's listening to this, it sounds so absurd. Hey, I just spent $1 million, $1 million on a set of antlers. It sounds crazy.
On not living paycheck to paycheck. That's
well, for sure. Yeah.
hey, good. Good for them. You always want everyone else. You want the other people. Well, yeah, it's someone that has serious money to do that. Obviously, even if you have serious money, you must love antler to spend that kind of money on it. And if that is indeed true, that's the first time 7 digits was that. What I should say here, let me back up because that's not true. For a single piece, I guess there's obviously been collections out there that have sold for more than that, but for a single set of sheds or a rack, it's never been sold for 7 digits.
Mm-hmm. How do you think with it, for the guy that has spent $1 million, with it now coming out that the antlers were altered, are they still worth $1 million?
That's a load.
That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, how about that? Definitely $1 million question. It changes value. There's no doubt about it. Are those antlers? And I think there's many answers to this. Antler isn't the answer or the only. It changes value. So let's just hypothetically say they sold for $1 million, and that whole story comes out. They have Shaped Point. What it's worth? I don't know. Does it have the value? Maybe. I have no idea, to be honest with you. It definitely would reduce it because it's something that wasn't there when it sold, right? And when an antler is altered in any way, shape, or form, it inevitably changes value to a collector. So yes, it does reduce the value. Does that say down the road that some other guy won't pay 2 million for it? Maybe 10 years down the road, I don't know. Someone might. Maybe they love those antlers so much. There's still historical meaning behind them.
Yeah.
Almost going to be, made more. They're going to be talked about more because of this non-typical points being shaved off. So there's going to be a little bit more notoriety around them. So, really weird way, could it possibly add value? Maybe. A lot of times, though, guys want unaltered antler. That's the preference. It gets really dicey now because scoring organizations usually have a disclaimer that if antler is altered, it will be removed from the book. So it kind of begs the question: what happens now? Will the North American Shed Hunters Club remove the general from their record book?
That's a big question.
Oh, it's a huge question. I mean, they'll have an asterisk,
Yeah.
next. They would be, well, this is the fun part. The general would net more than the Milo Hansen before the shave point because it nets around 218 before the shave points. But with the shave points, and you have to guess what they might be. Let's just say they're 3.5 a piece. We'll save 7 inches. So now it's going to net like 211. So Milo, and on the other hand, it doesn't beat Milo. So lots. Same thing with the shed world. Right now, number one, there's a set of sheds from Missouri called the Moloch sheds. Those are number 2. So if they're removed from the book, that makes the Molochs number 1. I believe the shade points were taken into consideration. It might lower the score, but they wouldn't beat the Molochs anyway. So it might be number 2 there anyways with the shade points. So, but either way, it's probably going to have an asterisk next to it, regardless of what happens.
Because depending on what they do, like that is the precedence. Because anyone that hears this or saw that, maybe it's a bad personality trait, but it's like, well, what else is like this? I mean, like that's the very first question, because it's like, man, this deer is, the way it was described. Everyone knows this deer. It's such a huge piece of whitetail history, and for however many years, we were lied to. That is just the truth of the matter. We, as a public, as a community, as whitetail enthusiasts, we were lied to.
That's the bad part of the antler business. There's a lot of fraud. Maybe a lot of it's an overstatement. There's a fair amount of fraud.
Well, the ripple effect of just this is maybe not a lot, but the ripple effect makes it creates a tsunami wave.
Well, I mean, you're probably going to segue into it at some point, but then, you look at the general, the Huff lately, what's going on there. So people probably have a lot of questions. The more high profile the piece, probably the more scrutiny it should receive, in all fairness, to be honest with you. I think asking questions is actually always a good idea. I think getting as much information is also a good idea. Again, especially in high profile people. Unfortunately, the higher profile, the more likelihood of something like this happening. It's not the first time it's happened. For those of you familiar with the Sale Aarons buck from Minnesota, the same thing happened. Had a couple non-typical points, I believe, that were shaved off. It would have been the world record before that. Pictures surface after the fact showing the non-typical points, so it's not in the book. Can't be in the book because it was altered. So this has happened before. Unfortunately, it happened again. It also happened on something that was very widely known. So it's unfortunate. It's it's one of those things where a lot of guys that are out there right now that like it rubs them the wrong way. There's guys out there that are advocates for the truth. There's guys that aren't. But the guys that are out there fighting for the truth, there'll be more talk about this moving forward.
Yeah, it feels like maybe this isn't a good comparison, but when Michael Jordan took a year off from the NBA, and it was because of, because he just needed to take a year off. played baseball. And then the conspiracy theorists say it was because he was gambling. And, the reason his father passed away is because of gambling debts. And it's like, it sounds crazy. Or like if you would have said, hey, yeah, the general, that's actually it had X amount of inches shaved off, I'd be like, no way. Like that seems crazy. And it's like because it was so solidified and so accepted. And have you ever seen the general sheds in person? Personally?
Um,
You
I
cut out, you said you have?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
about I want to say 5 years.
Do you think they took like a Dremel and shaved that off and then it's like how do you match the coloring or how do you make it look like it's
You have Antler Artists out there that can do amazing work that the best eye cannot tell if something was repaired or if it was shaved and then filled. You will not be able to tell. Um, I'd like to say that the guys that are the best at it are honest brokers, in my opinion. So I think some of the wrongdoing happens outside of that. The think of a Tom Sexton or a Mike Shrewis or a Bro. Those are probably the guys that stick out the most that I know, anyways. Those guys are good, honest brokers, and I think they frown upon this kind of thing happening.
so was we're getting to a can of worms here. I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this question, but it's okay. Whoever shaved these antlers, I'm guessing a guy that was outfitting and leasing ground probably wasn't an antler artist. So there had to be an antler artist around that era when they were shaved. So it wasn't just a one man show, more than likely.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Now that gets into some interesting story there. Those antlers were brought to an antler artist at some point, and they supposedly had chews on them.
Oh,
Chews were repaired. So I can let you and your viewers read between the lines there.
yeah. So that it was to the effect of squirrels or mice or something.
Correct. But I think it's safe to interpret that those chews were probably something else.
Yeah. Wow. That's it's just like it's crazy because it just you start thinking about all the other potential deer and you assume 99% of them are what as advertised.
Yes.
Would
Yeah.
you think that's a fair estimate, like 1 out of 100 of take the top 100 deer in the typical category? Do you think it's fair to say, so we're compiling sheds, shot, and just found dead. Take the top 100 typicals of all time. Do you think that 1% have been altered, 2%, 5%? This is just your opinion, and I know I'm putting you on the hot seat here.
No, I don't mind at all. It's a great question. I would say if you want to go that route, I probably think that if you're okay adding fabricated,
Sure.
like it's going to be higher than that 1%. If it's probably just a ballpark, it's probably going to be like 5% if I had to throw a number out there. Some of that is an opinion only. It's my opinion only. There's a lot of pieces out there that as a collector you'd want to stay away from because there's too much smoke. There's might not be a fire, but there's smoke there. And a lot of times that smoke inevitably turns into fire. Sometimes it turns into nothing. But if you looked at, we'll say the top 50 of typical and the top 50 of non-typical, it might be between 5 and 10%. Maybe that's too high. I'll stick with 5. I'll be conservative. I'll say like 5-ish. My opinion might be there's definitely some smoke there.
Wow.
And I think, this is the good thing for the most part. I think fabrication, alteration has always been there, unfortunately, with the antler world. It still happens to this day, but I feel like it's maybe not as prevalent as it once was.
Trail
I,
cam photos, more
I also
pictures.
I also would say too is if the truth ever came out and people always kind of steer away from the truth. If the truth came out on some of this stuff, it would probably really slow down and stop. Back in the day when there was just magazines and TV, even before that, people could probably get away with murder before that. We'll say pre-90s, right? I think people could get away with a lot. It was a different world. I think in today's world, it still happens, but man, people are playing with fire if you want to try to pull that now. Because if you do get busted, look what will happen to you. Your name is all over social media and everyone will exactly know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you're really rolling the dice nowadays, I think, doing that type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, so I think in terms of other whitetail news, you've been on here before, and were gracious enough to meet up with me in Illinois and some of your travels to show the Samupa buck in person. And at the time, it was the number 2 all time typical, and then the Huff buck was the biggest typical shot in the United States. It has an updated score. The rough score of the Iupa buck is trending towards being larger than that. So is something crazy going to happen with the Iupa buck, or do you think it's going to be pretty close to where it was scored previously? And obviously, you're not a Boone and Graga scorer, but
It's a,
that's a question people are going to ask.
it's a good question. So the Milo Hansen buck is number 1. It's
Yep.
from Canada, and that almost seems like it's gonna be very difficult to beat in our lifetime. Absolutely fantastic deer, how symmetric, wide, it has such a great look. Behind the Hansen was the Dustin Huff buck from Indiana, and then behind that was the Sam Iupa buck. And the Sam Iupa buck, when I acquired it from Sam, I think we were just kind of hoping it'd be cool if it beat Mel Johnson. And Mel Johnson, I believe, is 204 and change. So we're like,
Yep.
okay, 5. I mean, a net 200 is just a pink unicorn. So anyone's going to be happy with that. So the Sam Iupa buck was entered originally at 207 and 7/8, which is fantastic. Which actually it surpassed Mel. Obviously, Mel is still the bow.
Archery typical. Yep.
Yep. From your state.
Yep.
And the Dustin Huff was at 211, and then Dustin Huff went to panel. Sam Iupa buck did not go to panel, and at panel they lowered the Dustin Huff to 205. The Iupa buck was scored a second time at 208.6. So I don't see the Iupa. It needs one more score, which is going to happen probably before the end of this month to be verified by Boone and Crockett. I don't see it going much beyond that realm of 207.7 to 208.6. It's probably going to settle somewhere right in there.
Here's a question for you. So does it need to get scored 3 times, or does it need to be? How does that work?
So from my understanding, if you have a top 3 ranked deer, I think it's in a 3-year period. Hopefully I'm right when I say that for Boone and Crockett. If it's a top 3 deer in that period, it gets invited to panel. If you don't go to panel, like right now, the Sam Iupa buck has an asterisk next to it because it hasn't been verified, if you will, or it hasn't been paneled.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't go to the panel in Springfield, you have to have, besides the original entry score, you have to have 2 other scorers verify it independently. And at this point, 1 of 2 have done that. So it needs 1 more. That's kind of Boone and Crockett's recommendations, or I shouldn't say recommendations. That's their rules for entry. If your deer, if it ranks in the top 3 in that period.
What score do they land on if it gets scored 3 times?
Say that one more time.
Since it gets scored three different times, how does it become your official score?
What number do they use?
Yeah.
You know what? That's a great question. and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they take the biggest of those three scores. I don't know if they take the median. I've been told a couple of different things, so to be honest, I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I don't know what score they're going to take.
That's interesting. Yeah, because
It,
I'm wondering, like, do they average all three of them together?
it is. You know, the whole process is a little bit complicated. Some of the scores from Boone and Crockett, it's great for them too on how to go about this process in regard. And I think, you know, once you get up to a certain point and you have to go through the panel or go, and if you don't make panel and you have to have three independent scores, I think that's kind of rare territory for a lot of guys, in all fairness to them. So I don't think they maybe have all the answers to those questions.
Yeah.
I'm kind of just having fun with it, just going with the flow, and whatever number they throw at me, that's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that'll be very interesting, and it'll be cemented into whitetail history. And I should take a closer look at it when I had it in my hands, see if there was anything busted off. And I'm 100% kidding right now. But
No, you should. I mean, I think that's fair. I think anyone should do that, to be honest with you.
yeah, well, I really never would have thought about it. But I'm 100% kidding. Actually, I was going through a hard drive today, and I had some of the pictures of that day, and gosh, that's a really big deer. When I was dumping some stuff on a hard drive, but. So you think that'll be scored later this month? So potentially end of June this year or this month, there'll be a new official largest typical shot in the United States, officially recognized by Boone and Crockett. Is that a fair statement?
Seems highly likely at this point.
Yeah.
Yep. You didn't know that you were fondling the U.S. typical record. Oh.
No, I didn't.
I didn't either, though. By the way, to be fair, neither one of us did.
Yeah, because at that rate, the Huffbuck's score was 211, and you obviously had scored it, and it was like 207 or 208, and so that wasn't quite there. But I mean, still just an absolute specimen of a whitetail.
It is. It's having the symmetry obviously helps that deer, kind of like the Milo Hansen or even the Huff. Any of those high-ranking deer, it's the one thing they have, because the side-to-side deductions will murder you. So
Yeah.
those deer are very, very symmetrical, which also it's rare. It's rare to have a deer that's symmetrical. The Samupa buck gets dinged pretty good because I think he's got around 8 to 9 inches of non-typical, so that that hurts his score.
Mm-hmm. And there was sheds to the Iupa buck as well, and that's in someone's collection right now, correct?
Correct. So Matt Beard, who is a collector from Missouri, has a set of sheds the year previous, I believe. That's not known for sure, but likely. And he also has a single from that deer as well, which kind of made this story pretty cool, that there's these 3 sheds out there for a long time off this mystery buck, right? No one ever saw the buck. And then many years, like almost 3 decades or longer, then out comes the deer that was randomly discovered by some electrician, which is a pretty cool story.
It's a very cool story, and it's just so bizarre. All the lore of whitetail hunting. I mean, this seems like the plot always thickens. Right when you think it's like, oh, everything's discovered. Oh, we know everything, and something like that breaks, and then they're shifting in scores, and it feels like a moving target.
It can be, and sometimes it's organic, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah,
I think to a lot of people out there, it's probably confusing, to be honest.
it is. It is confusing and I feel like that's where a lot of armchair comments come into, where, for instance, score changing. I mean, I've said some not positive things about Boone and Crockett, to tell you the truth, of like just armchair discussion, and I feel like sometimes they probably get more of a bad rap than what they really should. And like the common base is the one thing that bugs me with Boone and Crockett. That's usually the root of my complaints. Beyond that, I understand what they stand for, but the more you learn, it's this one. The more you learn, the less you know when it comes to a lot of this stuff.
I think when you get into any entity or any organization, or become more knowledgeable, there's more politics, if you will, at play. It's probably safe to say that. you could pretty much have a podcast just on Boone and Crockett and talking about, their organization. That's a maybe it's a couple few different podcasts. No. I will say that I haven't had a lot of exposure to them. My limited exposure has been good so far. There hasn't been always the same people at the helm there. It's changed over time. So hopefully they're at a point now where they're out to do the right thing. You would hope so. They kind of, from my perspective at this point, they seem like they are, and that's encouraging.
There's a lot more people that score their deer by Buckmaster more and more every single year.
It seems that way. And
well, yeah, I was just about to say, from my perspective, because I don't know the number of entries versus one or the other.
It really depends on what scoring organization you prefer. And if you're a hunter, unless you're chasing some sort of record or had a deer that potentially was a record, you might not want Boone and Crockett. You might want to use Buckmasters and get the most inches out of your deer. I think on the surface, that seems, I shouldn't say on the surface. As a hunter, that makes the most sense. If I was hunting still today and I shot a deer, I want all my inches, right? I want all my typical, all my non, the spread. I want the whole thing. No, I guess Buckmasters does it both ways. They do it, I think they do it without the spread, and they do a BTR score with the spread, which is nice. The way that Boone and Crockett does it, again, I think if you have an upper ranking deer from a hunter standpoint, probably a good idea. From a collector standpoint, Boone and Crockett maybe has not been a perfect organization over its existence. It's kind of the barometer guys go to, though. And, when it comes to sheds, that's the North American Shed Hunters Club. That's kind of Boone and Crockett's equivalent in the shed world. That's who guys that find sheds, which for the most part, there's only one organization with sheds. I actually think Buckmasters score sheds too, to be fair. But most people go to the North American Shed Hunters Club for their scoring and entry. I think it just depends on what you want to get out of your hunting or collecting. Buckmasters, two very different organizations. Buckmasters, I believe, has 4 different categories. I think they have a perfect, typical, semi-irregular, irregular. And then Boone and Crockett has typical and non-typical.
Yeah. So
you have 2 categories versus 4. Boone and Crockett, for the most part, doesn't have a weapon category. There's a variety of deer entered in different ways they were killed. And I think Buckmasters has different weapon categories on top of so it gets a little confusing. But
it does. Yeah.
It's nice. It's nice if there's more than one organization out there. So that's good. It's not like a monopoly. There's only one of them. There's more than one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. I've seen Boone and Crockett they get a bad rap out there.
They do. They really do. I think some of it's not all fair for them, to be honest.
They get lambasted. I think there's probably been times maybe where it's deserved, and sometimes it's definitely, like you just said, it's definitely not, but it does happen.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this breaking news update, and I want to talk to someone that's closer to the situation than myself rather than me speculating, and just I wanted to bring someone in that would have a better idea and had seen the sheds in person too. So I really appreciate you coming on here, and I'm very excited to see the official panel scoring in the Samupa buck. I'm sending good positive thoughts that nothing crazy happens, which it doesn't sound like it's going to be the case. And anything else you want to close out here with, Jamie?
Oh, I think, off the Samupa buck, I'll keep you updated. I should know more later this month. And I think with some of these details with the general, with the Huff buck, keep your eyes open. There's going to be some articles out there on both bucks.
Awesome. Yeah. And where do you think those will be published, if you had to guess?
Most likely North American Whitetail would be my guess.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I need to get a new subscription so I can read them when they come out. Awesome. All right, Jamie, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good seeing you, Jake.